Good evening and welcome. I'm Michael Goodson. I'm the senior curator. Thanks. You needn't applaud me. I have the easy portion tonight. I have some announcements and a litany of thank yous. I'm going to try to do this efficiently, but I may end up sounding like the end of a pharmaceutical commercial, so you'll forgive me. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is point out that tomorrow night we have this incredible performer here, Josh Fox. The New York Times has called Josh one of the most adventurous impresarios of the New York avant-garde. And I would say to that, don't let New York throw you if it might, and don't let avant-garde throw you if it might, because he's actually so much more than that. He's an Oscar-nominated filmmaker, an accomplished playwright, an activist, and journalist. And he really does, I would argue, what's most necessary now, which is that he speaks. And he speaks about the things that are the most important right now, which is the destruction of truth and how that in turn might, in fact, destroy the world. And it's fun. You have to trust me on that. And it's moving, and it's performative. It's not a litany of facts, and it's not a lecture. It's so much more than that. So that's tomorrow night here. So, go home, get some rest, and come back tomorrow to see Josh Fox. There are tickets available, and we would love to see all of your faces here, or a measurable percentage of you. The other thing I'd like to do is just talk about a few shows in town that I think everyone should know about. The first is at this great space called No Place Gallery. Albert Gray has a show there called The Lights Are On, and it closes this Saturday, but it's open tomorrow. So before on your way to Josh Fox, go to No Place's website to get everything, which is noplace.com, I believe. The CMA has a great show curated by Tyler Cann called A Measure of Humanity. That, in fact, closes on Monday, so hustle up and see the show before it closes if you haven't yet. The Pizzuti Collection has a really beautiful show curated by Greer Pagano called Take Up Space. It's immersive and lovely. You should see that show if you haven't yet. At Angela Melica Gallery, there is a really fascinating show called To What Red Hell, curated by, I would say, the Wexner's own Jason Simon. He has deep affiliation with the Wexner Center. And there's this incredible work by Bill Jones, who also has history with the Wexner Center, not to be missed. And while you're there, right across the hallway at Appendix, which is the space that Ry Wharton runs, is this great show by George Rush called Middle Age Part 1. And George's book is there too, which I highly recommend. At CCAD, opening in a couple of weeks, I believe, is this show that highlights the artists from Fierce Pussy called Arms, Ache, Avid, and On. Aeon, sorry. That opens in a couple weeks. That sounds incredible. There you have it. Thanks for letting me do that, by the way. I have like 1,000 people to thank, and I'm going to try to do it efficiently and get on with it, but I think it's really important, actually, because none of this happens without all these people. They have deep involvement with every aspect of it, and I'd like to start with the most incredible group of preparators that I've ever worked with. Emma Levesque Schaefer, Jake Hollier, Jack Colson, Scott Short, Nick Boso, Amy Flowers, Kyle Downs, Jake Hollier, I've said Jake Hollier, I think, already, and James McDevick-Strendy, who actually runs No Place Gallery, it should be said. They are incredible, and they work hard, and they have vision, and they're invested. Please give them a round of applause. We have a top-notch permanent preparatory staff. James Miracle is a permanent preparator here and is a problem solver. Same with Nick Stull, great. Dave Dickus is our installation manager, and all three of these guys help us design these shows, and they help shape the vision of these shows. And along with Steve Jones, our senior design engineer, and there's a lot of sound and AV in this show, and Steve did all of it. They're terrific. Kim Coleman is our head registrar, and like everyone else, makes this possible. Allison Binger was our assistant registrar. She's now, we've lost her to art history. Not the larger concept of art history, but literally to the Department of Art History. And we'll miss her. Our education department we've worked with them a lot with this show, and they have helped shape the show as well. Shelley Casto is the director of education. Dion Custer has been a person I've talked to about this show since the beginning of the show, and she is part of it and part of the vision of it. Alana Ryder has organized this talk tonight, as she has almost every other talk that takes place on this stage. Thank you very much. Teresa Tuma, is our assistant in exhibitions and makes a bow of the knot of travel that is part of these shows and makes it look easy. And Marissa Espy, our curatorial assistant, who drove to Cleveland to buy that couch in Gallery A. And did so much more. She also has left the Wexner to go to Bard's curatorial study program. Look out for her, please. She's going to do something. And our director of exhibitions management, Megan Kavanaugh, who is, in fact, the engine that makes all of this run. I was thinking this thing. So, you know, in movies where somebody's trying to get away and the car doesn't start and they open the hood and there's this tangle of wires sticking out, the part that they have removed is Megan Kavanaugh. Does that make sense? All right. I like that metaphor. I don't know, I couldn't help myself. Bill Horrigan, our curator at large, for all of his guidance, and the Wexner Center director, Sherry Gelden, for her wisdom and trust and vision. I'd also like to thank Lehman Maupin Gallery at New York, Hong Kong, Seoul, and in particular Anna Stodhart, who's here, who was just great. Thank you. Suzanne Weilmetter in Los Angeles, and Kavi Gupta in Chicago. These three galleries helped us immensely with gathering the works for this show. I'd like to thank all the people, there are too many of them to list, that loaned work for the exhibition. You didn't have to do it. It was big of you. Thank you very much. And our donors, the Crane Family Foundation, Crab, Brown, and James, and Donna and Larry James. Without them, we can't do this. Thank you. From Mickalene, I'm almost done, I promise. From Mickalene Thomas Studio, Jeff Freeland and Sammy Hopkins, they were incredible, really incredible to work with. I'm in the home stretch. Raquel Chevermont was kind and open, and from the moment I walked into Mickalene's studio, and it means a lot. I would say, lastly, actually not lastly, there's one more person, but Mickalene Thomas herself. I've learned more doing this show from Mickalene than any show that I can recall doing. She's smart, and she's tough, and she's consistent, and it was a learning experience for me. Thank you very much. Now, lastly, really, and by way of introduction, my co-curator in this exhibition, Lucy Zimmerman, who is, this was truly a collaborative effort, and Lucy's vision is in this show everywhere. I also say that Lucy was more recently a curatorial assistant here, but as of September 2nd, she is an assistant curator at the Wexner Center for the Arts. Congratulations, Lucy. And with that, I'll hand it over to Lucy Zimmerman. Thank you very much.
I'll try to keep this brief to give you what you want what you came for, which is Mickalene and Beverly, but I owe them a proper introduction. They're two fiercely brilliant women, and we're so excited for you to be here. Beverly Guy-Sheftall is a feminist scholar, writer, editor, and has been involved with the National Women's Studies movement since its inception. Dr. Guy-Sheftall has published a new essay in our exhibition catalog for this show. It's hot off the press, and it's hot, and it's in the bookstore, so pick it up, where she positions Mickalene's work within a powerful historical lineage of Black women artists and feminist thought, all in service of creating more nuanced and expanded renderings of Black womanhood. Dr. Guy-Sheftall is the Anna Julia Cooper Professor of Women's Studies and the founding director of Women's Research and Resource Center at Spelman College in Atlanta. She was recently elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and is a past president of the National Women's Studies Association. She has an extensive publication history. She's the founding editor of Sage, a scholarly journal on Black women, which was published between 1983 and 1996, and she co-edited the first anthology on Black women's literature, Sturdy Black Bridges, Visions of Black Women in Literature, among so many other things. Beyond her impressive publication history, Beverly has been the recipient of numerous fellowships and awards and has been a vital figure in activism and advocacy groups, including the Black Women's Health Project and the National Council for Research on Women. She has been instrumental in development of student activism around misogynistic images of Black women in hip hop, as well as a broad range of social justice issues, including reproductive rights and violence against women. Next, I'm truly, truly honored to introduce Mickalene Thomas, whose capacious yet singular innovative artistic vision spans across media, including painting, collage, photography, video, installation. She's a force. And she draws on art history, popular culture, memory, and her own relationships to create an expanded and more inclusive contemporary vision of female sexuality, beauty, and power generated through her gaze. This exhibition, I'll allow you to experience it on your own and form your own opinions, but it's an incredible look at four main of her most significant and sustained muses, her late mother, Sandra Bush, herself, Maya, and Raquel Chevron, as well as a selection of friends. The portraits of these women demand attention and exude power whilst claiming space for women of color, shattering the narrow, marginalized representations and narratives of Black women in art history and popular culture. In Mickalene Thomas, she received her BFA from Pratt, an MFA from Yale. Her work is in major museum and private collections all over the world, and she's been the subject of numerous solo exhibitions and group shows at prestigious institutions, including the Brooklyn Museum, the ICA Boston, Aspen Art Museum, MoCA LA, and the touring exhibition organized by Aperture Muse, Mickalene Thomas Photographs, which opens next month at the Dayton Art Institute. So if you need some more Mickalene, come back here and then go there. She also has forthcoming projects in the works at the Art Gallery of Ontario and the Contemporary Art Center New Orleans. Mickalene is the recipient of numerous awards and grants, including the Wexner Center Artist Residency Award in Visual Arts for 2017-2018, as well as the United States artist Francie Bishop Good and David Horvitz Fellow. Anonymous was a Woman Award and the Brooklyn Museum's Asher B. Durand Award. And most recently, she received an honorary doctorate from the New York Academy of Arts, their Tribeca Ball. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Mickalene Thomas and Beverly Guy-Sheftall.
just say a few kind of personal things very briefly at the beginning. I want to just say,
Personal.
not too personal. I want to thank you, Mickalene, for inviting me back to have this conversation with you. We had a conversation at Spelman College where I work.
Listen up.
And I will follow you anywhere to do this, to talk with you. I am truly moved and honored to be here. I also want to say how happy I am that I was asked to write that essay entitled Rebel Woman for the exhibition. And I have never seen anything so beautifully situated, that essay, as it is in that book. So I want to just say thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you on many levels because when we first met during my exhibition at Spelman College last year, and we did our talk, it was probably the most thrilling and captivating conversation that I've had with someone. And I just remember leaving and thinking, I want to have her in my life more. I want to speak with her more. I want the audience, when I have shows, to hear me have a conversation with this woman. And people need to know who you are, you know, if they don't. And also, I wanted your words to reflect against my images in some way. And so I knew right off the bat when I was going to do this book for the show that I wanted you as one of my writers. Oh. And Beverly and I are speaking again next month at the ICP in New York. So I'm very excited about that. We'll be talking about my photographs. So here we are at the Wexner. Thank you. And happy to be here and have this conversation. And I guess we should begin.
Okay.
It's quite bright, but
We're gonna talk for about an hour, and we're not gonna be able to have any Q&A because we want you to hurry to the exhibition. And I'm sure I've got more questions down here than I can get to, but we'll get started. I think when people think about artists, they mostly imagine a solitary person in a studio by themselves, isolated from the world. You, on the other hand, have a very unique and powerful collaborative vision. Mm-hmm. And so I'd like for you to just talk a little bit about how you have disrupted this idea of the solitary, lonely artist in terms of how you see yourself as an artist.
that's a really good question because although I have disrupted that notion of being a solitary artist, I feel that way. Always. And I think it's because of those feelings, those emotions, of the notion of this romanticized notion of the artist working in their room and, you know, with their own thoughts and their own ideas, and hopefully through those ideas and thoughts that they'll make something amazing. I've realized that it's the community of artists and around me, my network, and it's also the people I work with and the sitters that help really build a foundation, a strong foundation with my concepts. Like, I can't do it without them. I can't make my art by myself, mm-hmm. even if it's looking through various art history books, you know, looking at artists that have come before me, mm-hmm. and thinking about those particular concepts and ideas that they sort of pushed up against or created visually within their own sort of execution and their ideas of art making. I think I look to them. I'm always looking to those who've come before me as a support system. As a way of leaning on their shoulders and building and asking questions, in the same way as how I look to Carrie Mae Weems and Lorna Simpson, all of these women that come before me, or writers, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, like all of these writers that come into the studio. And whether it's music, Millie Jackson, like all of these people that, you know, that I listen to feed sort of the images that people see here today. And I think I take all of that and I try to make sense of it. I try to figure it out and depend on it, whether it's my partner, Raquel Chevermont, who's here, not only a partner and collaborator, business partner, but you know, I lean on her for, you know, her support. Oftentimes I will make something in my studio, and then it's my assistants. You know, I'm fortunate that I do have assistants to help me execute some of my ideas, and it's one that's worked with me for several years. So it's like you build upon that, and I don't think I want to be. Oftentimes I thought about this. Oftentimes I do go to the studio and I wish no one was there. You know, and so I'm always within my own space, trying to carve out my own space, whether that be in a separate studio or building a wall or finding an area where I can just contemplate and create and have my own thoughts. But then I also reach out to them and I'll have my ideas and then we'll talk about that. And even if I make something, and oftentimes Raquel will come in and I know right away when she thinks something isn't working. And I'll ask her and she will just say, oh yeah, maybe that color isn't right. So that in itself is your community and your club. I think my work has evolved and gotten stronger because I do have a good support system of pushing up against. I think I push up against the notion of that solitary mode of or ideal of notions of what you think of an artist. It exists, but it doesn't exist. I think it's an inner emotional battle or struggle sometimes more than a physical, tangible space or active being. I think it's the fear of failing sometimes that allowed me to succeed. You
That's
know?
not possible.
It's not possible, but I think, you know, being a girl from Camden, New Jersey, you always feel like, you know, there's something that could pull you back, you know, and that there's a possibility that all of this will or could collapse. So having that idea sort of right there, the constant reminder, allows me to push forward as an artist. But also it's fun, you know? And I think it's also those inner battles of, you know, I think if one of the paintings that I try to articulate visually that idea of the solitude artist and one who depends on the community of people is in the Wrestler series. You know, that's a very personal autobiographical portrait of myself. It's like this inner outer being, the soul, you know, like that challenge. And so when I made those paintings, it was really thinking about myself as a woman, who I was, identity, and all of those things, but also very more internal and emotional sort of state of being. And so in my work, I try often to create some very profound emotional qualities that no one really talks about in work, and the intimacy and love and desire are things that may be tabooed. I think I love sort of pushing up against sort of those ideas because there are often things I still question and I don't have all the answers.
You know, it's interesting. My second question is exactly where you are going. And I was going to ask you, because I'm not assuming that everybody in the audience knows a lot about your autobiography, and your work is so deeply personal and intimate. So what few things about your life would you be willing to share with us this evening that you think has had a big impact on your art?
I think I already have the portrait of my mother. Happy birthday to a beautiful woman. I think everyone should sit through that. It's 23 minutes. It's a documentary. It's a very intimate, vulnerable portrait of my mother. Her narrating her story. And it's a visual portrait. It's a video portrait of her as her life is unfolding, unraveling, and this discovery as a daughter, learning about who she is and sort of her own trajectory in her life, and accepting that, and accepting her strengths and her weaknesses and her accomplishments, and along with her failures. And that, I mean, for so many years of my life, there was two faces of Mickalene. There was the very sort of conservative, educated, conforming to these other ideas of what was expected to me, but then it was the girl from Camden who didn't want anyone to know that her mother was an addict, right? So for so many years, I pushed that to the peripheral, right? I didn't let people know that about me. And then as I became an artist, I realized those things kept pushing through in my work. And I thought it was very important, if I was going to make these images of my mother and use her as my muse, that when it got to a point at that moment where I could no longer work with her in the same way that I was in the past, putting her in these particular poses or asking her to sit in these tableaus because she physically couldn't, I had to figure out another tool or visual tool to create work with her. And video seemed to make sense to me. And so, being that I believe that portraiture is a really great way to use as a starting point to making work, is starting with yourself or the people in your world. I believe that's probably the first place one should start. Is just look at your own life and work from that place. And it got to a point where I did so many images of my mother, portraits of her, paintings, collages, photographs. And at this particular point, my mother was images of her were being collected. And I thought, do any of these people really know who she is? Do they know what she's been through? Do they know anything about Mama Bush or Sandra Bush? Like, who's this woman? And then thoughts would come, it's like, well, who's Mona Lisa? Do we really know? Like, it's like we all have a story, right? And if we know that story, does it changes how you see the person in this image? And I was curious about that. When you know the truth, sometimes it's messy. And so I thought a video portrait of her was a really amazing way for me not to only tell her story, but to tell my story. Because I wasn't telling anyone. You know, up to that point, not many people who I've been friends with for years knew nothing about my family or my life. And so I use art in that way to articulate or express myself. And so that was, I felt a beautiful journey and also way of depicting a person through images, through a series of images and music, and using the music through the score of that, the score and composition and that film really acts as a thread of unfolding into the next sequence. And I really love that, using music as another way of narration. When, it's that part was like, don't mess with Bill. That's like her talking about my father. And so using song and music in that way to make these correlations to other people in her life. And I guess that's just a really great way and beauty of art making, that you sort of find something within your life that you could grab onto and see if it works. You sort of like a crapshoot almost. And I like that play. And because when I was making that film, I had no idea the impact it would have, not only on me, but its audience, and that it will continue to evolve and live on and be viewed and go through film festivals and be, exhibited and continued in various ways for people to see it. It was just only initially intended for one show, and then here we are, 6 years later, people are still wanting to see it.
And I hope people will really sit down and look at it.
I think you need to. I really hope everyone sits down as they walk. The idea for the show is to really allow those works of my mother be the beginning and the real impact of the show. It's like if you really look at the works and make these connections with the photographs and the installation, and you look at the installation and then you sit in the film, it really tells you so much about the artist, but also the importance of visibility, and why I'm depicting and wanting, and why there's a strong need for me to continue to make these powerful images of Black women.
I don't know any artist, visual or writer, who has celebrated her mother in the way that you have. Did your mother love these images?
Oh yeah. She was definitely powerhouse. 6'1", beautiful, big feet, size 13.
Ooh.
And extremely charismatic, and love every part of participating. And through the film, that was another thing that I learned through this documentary. I didn't really understand how important my mother's role was from her perspective, was to her, until I made this film. She expresses that in the film, and I learned that through this film. I think I was just blindly working as an artist, and it became this amazing collaboration and way for us to spend time with each other and really talk deeply one-on-one about who we were and are at that moment as individuals, but also me really looking at her as her own person, not necessarily as my mother, and accepting her for who she was at that time, and like the choices that she made had nothing to do with me. So learning about her in this film was it was really hard. I mean, there's a lot of things that I've learned that I edited out. It was like, my creative choice to not put everything in there, because I felt like there was a lot that I learned about her life and situations that wasn't good, and it would hurt other people. So I felt like if it was about other people or would affect other people, then it was unnecessary for me to put it in. So that's why it actually was an hour long, and I had to cut it out because there was so much stuff in there that I had to digest, that I don't think if I put it in there that I would be able to deal with the film, because it was quite heavy. And I wanted to make it light, in some ways. I wanted to have it be a little more open-ended so anyone could come to it, no matter what walk of life they were, what ethnicity, that they can find something familiar in this film. Even if it was just the thread of the music, you know, because the music's great. You know, a good friend of mine, Thomas Lauderdale from Pink Martini, he did all the music score for that. And so even if you enter the film through the music itself, then to me that's enough, because it still tells the story. And then really connecting it in her life to my work was important, because that was the journey, that's how we got there. And oftentimes, even today, I was being interviewed, and you know, one of the reporters asked about why is my work so personal? And I thought, well, why isn't it? It's an extension of yourself. And I think oftentimes it's hard for people to deal with truth and reality. You know, I think these works need to be seen more than any time. Today's the time for these works to be so much visible, because the impact that I feel when I'm making them. And they were asking if I was tired of making, it was just like a really interesting set of questions that kind of annoyed me. But I was being very respectful, because I felt like so many times people want artists to give them the answers to everything. And I feel like, you know, do some work. You know, look at the work, you know, like really look and be. Like, I don't have to give you all the answers. And I shouldn't. It's not my job. It's not my job to make you feel good about your whiteness, you know, or better, and explain my blackness. And I think so many times you're asked. And to be quite frankly, I don't know how else to make work. Even when I do have great concepts and ideas, especially when it, you know, for example, the first set of paintings that you see of my mother, and they're the multiple panels, different colors, pink, blue, and white, and yellow, using CMYK colors. You know, that's related to pop art, you know, Andy Warhol, like really derivative, pulling from that and thinking about sort of popular culture, popular images, graphic flatness, and why, and sort of things that are just like immediate, the photo booth, using and cutting and pulling from images of my mother, like very excited about that. And I remember, you know, seeing all these images of Andy Warhol, and it just made sense to me to put my mother in that same genre, you know, to pull from history in that way and have that play with my own images. And it's, you know, speaking with, you know, I love when Michael was looking at them, he's like, and it's about drawing. It's like, yeah, see, that's when someone's seeing, right? You know, they're not only seeing the personal, but he's looking beyond that. You know, it's like, so do some of the work, right? And really try to find the connections for yourself. And because most of it is rooted in a lot of art history, and I think it's important and for me to work from that, you know. And also I do that because I'm like, okay, why were they successful? You know, what made that work successful? And how could I use those works so that way my work in conversation, in the discourse, it can be aligned with those works. And I love when you Google Andy Warhol or Matisse, I come up. I love that.
Yes.
That's conversation,
Yes.
right? I inserted myself into this space, in this discourse, and I love when you Google, you know, Jackie O, images of Michelle Obama come up, you know, like it's fantastic.
Yes.
You know, it's like, you know, deconstructing those mode of constructs and not even knowing that, but that's what I'm doing by looking at these artists from the Western canon and sort of disrupting it by claiming the spaces, by inserting the black body. Now there's a new conversation when someone does a research with these other people. And that's exactly what I wanted. Because in art school, you know, when I was in art school starting in the 90s, you know, there were when you saw black art, it was like African art. You know, you had to really search out the contemporary black artists. You had to really search. They weren't really teaching that to you in school, you know, and I would always question, well, we were making art during this time, so why aren't we in the same conversation? You know, it's always the separate compartments of how you had to look at art, and that stayed with me, of trying to figure out as a visual artist, how can I integrate and break through and align myself within these conversations? And I hope that was a way of doing that.
I have one more question about your mother before I ask you about.
See, you like to get personal.
Well, no, this one is not so personal.
Okay.
The tableau, I was just amazed by, and I've heard several persons who went through there talk about how familiar it was. And I was looking at some
What
of the
did
albums.
they say? What were they saying?
That it reminded them of the space in which they grew up.
Oh, that's good.
And these weren't just black people.
That's
So I
good.
thought that was good.
Yeah. They saw themselves in the mirror.
Yes.
Right?
And I was happy to see those albums. I wanted to ask you, did your mother listen to Aretha Franklin?
Of course she did.
Okay.
Of course
So-
she did. Who didn't listen to the
Right,
Queen of
so
Soul?
I didn't get a chance to go through there, but I bet you there's an Aretha Franklin album in there. Or maybe not.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, okay.
What was her name? Marissa? Marissa? You can blame her. No.
Okay.
No, it wasn't on the list. But yeah, she did listen to Aretha. You know, Aretha was great, right?
So just a little personal thing. I grew up on the same street with Aretha
You
in
did?
Memphis, Tennessee, before the family moved to Detroit, and so she's been in my head and in my life for a very, very long time. So
I should do some paintings. I often think of certain women that I wish I had the opportunity to paint. She's one of them. And that may still happen. You know, I've done Donna Summers and all those women, but Aretha would be good. She has a lot of grit. Yeah, and I like that. You know, looking at those women. That's why I use Eartha Kitt a lot. You know, Eartha Kitt. You know, she's, you know, her prowess is just incredible, and you know, it's just like she's one of those women you can't really figure out, and I really like her complication. I like that she's complex and wicked and wickedly smart, and I like that she, you know, really was always provocative and made you think about who you were and how she used her platform and her stage, you know, in the same way of certain comedians like Moms Mabley use their platform and voice to speak about critical issues during their time. And so I try to use a lot of those women in my work as a way of being my voice and signifier for, you know, as a political nod, you know. Oftentimes people ask whether, you know, I'm a political artist, and I was like, you know, just the notion, you know, painting black women, that's a revolutionary act, just putting them on the wall and continue to do that and pushing up against that and demanding for space and for them to be seen. And that was the other question the reporter asked that was annoying, whether I would continue making, when, you know, if I would ever get tired of using the materials I'm using or the images. So I don't know. I just kind of moved on, but it's fine. I'm sorry to.
out the person. That's
Yeah.
okay.
But no. I mean, but even in her questions, I guess even in my being annoyed, I'm still thinking about it. So maybe she did something right. I don't know. You know, I mean, it's kind of like an art critic. They give you a bad review, and you kind of think about what they wrote about, whether it's good or bad. So it's fine.
I read a lot of critics of your work, and I was pretty positive about them, and I wanted to ask you if you pretty much have appreciated how critics have dealt with your work or not. Or maybe you don't
Sometimes,
bother.
I think sometimes I think a lot of times critics are lazy and they just get it wrong. I think today writers are, I think a lot of writers around art are just lazy, and they just, with the accessibility of, Google search, people just find one article and they just go from there, and they just take that article and they just rewrite it, and then they rewrite it, and it's the same article, and no one does the work. No one researches, no one investigates. Usually writers were like investigators. They were ferocious, they were hungry, they wanted to find the answer that nobody else found, right? And they wanted to ask the question that no one else asked. Now everyone asks the same because they don't do the work. And so the writing just sort of, this ripple effect is the same, because people, everything's immediate, and they just all want to say the same thing. It's like this article came out with me, with another artist, and I don't want to get into it because I want to have a conversation
Well, I was
about
almost about to call her name, but I won't.
yeah, and then every article about me and this other artists, and whether appropriation and him doing work like mine, every article was the same, but no one really asked the questions of why. They all just started saying, yeah, they're very similar. Yeah, no one really talked about the truth, and how this usually happens to women artists, when men usually take what they're doing and claim it, and they become successful around it. No one really, that wasn't the conversation. I think there's a bigger conversation to that particular issue that no one talked about. So I'm actually hoping to do it in an op-ed piece.
Oh, good. You've talked about the influence of particular artists on your work, like Carrie Mae Weems and the Malian photographers at City Bay, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah, Malik Sidibe
And,
Seydou Keita,
And writers have also had a lot of impact. And could you talk a little bit about the influence of writers on your work? I was looking through some of the books that were in the tabloids. And I was just loving and remembering reading some of those books.
Yeah, they did. I mean, they had a great impact on my idealism as a child, right? And understanding who I was as a black woman, as a young black girl, I think Alice Walker's writing stays with me mostly. And I have, my connection to The Color Purple. I so deeply invested and proud and connected to that work, and so much where I had to make work around that work. It was very important for me to make work about those characters and Color Purple, because how Alice Walker, I remember seeing first The Color Purple at 14, when I was 14 years old, and how all of the different women were depicted, but the support system, that sisterhood, right? But also the love between two women.
Yes.
And it was, for me, at 14, really dealing with my own sexuality and trying to figure that out at 14, seeing, love between two black bodies, female black bodies, like, that love. And it was just like, that's me, the representation. That desire, whether it was pursued or not, but sort of the closeness of it, that how close it got. I felt like I can touch it and just be right with them in the center, between that space between the two, and how Suge used the mirror, right, to show Celie how beautiful she was, right? That's very powerful. you know, sort of like how they leaned on each other and then how it reversed, you know. And so there's certain, you know, Zadie Smith, there's so many writers that stay with me and stay with my work, and I think about how I could use them, and bringing them into my work in the installations is very important, because it's a way for the viewer when if you go to the room where Raquel's room, I guess if we're gonna call them that, the tableau where it's open, all of you are invited to sit in these spaces. I started to think about community in a way of building a community and allowing the audience to be a participant in its space. And once I took down the walls of the tableau, I realized that they no longer act as period rooms, where, you know, in museums they're like, do not enter, do not step into. And I really want the viewers to engage with the space. So once I took down the walls, I realized I had this other platform where the viewer could enter. And so once they enter the space, I realized that it was really my responsibility to provide something with them, to provide other material that related to the work in a way that has shaped me as an artist, as a Black woman, as a queer person in the world. And what are those literary books, you know? So that whether you've read them or not, that you can actually pick them up and sort of find this connection. And take one, but leave one if you take one. And that was very exciting to me to know that now I have created a community within an art institution where people who may not feel like they belong, now they belong, right? That they're here, that there's a place for them in the work. And that was very exciting to me, to integrate that or add sort of literature. For the first time, I realized I can actually integrate literature into my work, aside from the titles, you know, that I can actually put that in its place and have it add another layer to my work. And then think of social spaces, right? Because in some places when I do the tableaus, like I've done in Raquel's room, sometimes there's programming that happens within the museum where there's poetry or someone will pick up the book. So there's different ways to use the space, which excites me, you know, because I think a lot of times people move through work so fast that I'm always trying to create a Rothko moment where people actually stay and look at the work and be and contemplate and really think about what they're doing. And that's really, I like that. I love that extra layer that the tableau has evolved into now, this active space that the viewer can now be a participant, that they can be in these same spaces that the sitter has been in. And that, I think it's exciting for the viewer, I'm not sure, but I like them.
You know, I want to echo Michael, who's one of the co-curators, who said he was moved by the exhibition. I was overwhelmed by the...
In what way?
I'm
hot.
I was, I got tremendous joy and pleasure going...
Was it the video of Raquel?
That too.
I mean...
I don't, you know...
Come on, guys.
I don't...
In which part?
I don't think I have ever seen any celebration and love of Black women like I see in your work as I walk through that exhibition. I mean, it is radical to love Black women.
It is radical.
Okay.
It is radical.
It is radical.
And it's more
Okay.
radical to have it be seen.
Yeah, to
to see it.
To
and,
see it.
And that's why I started doing the video, because I just feel like there's not enough images, moving images of black women loving black women in that way. And it's just like, it exists, goddamn. And we're always like the gay man, the gay man. It's just like, it's just like, we're always so, see the black gay man and the gay men kissing. It's like, what about, it's
Exactly.
like, I mean, we exist. We love each other.
And the self-love, you saw the self-love in those.
Yeah.
Because we've been socialized to think that black women don't love themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and that's what I
you know.
love about the video with Raquel and I, is because regardless of us being lovers, it's like our bodies are so different, right? And how we navigate the world is so different, and how we relate our bodies to each other is, and our bodies, in that sense, the difference of our body and how we look at each other. Like, she looks at me like she loves Mickalene, I've never had a woman look at me like that and allow me to appreciate me loving my curves, you know what I mean? And so it's like, I love that, and I love Raquel. I love the sex. So it's like, how do you put that, on film? How do you express that? And I've always, I don't know how to do that in painting. I tried. I don't know how to do that in a flat two-dimensional image. It didn't make sense. I knew if I did, it wouldn't be as powerful, right? Because there's more truth in photography and film than there is in painting, right? We see ourselves. We understand it. It's that relationship with the image. And so I knew that it needed to be in a film or a video or photography, so that when other people see it, they see Mickalene, right? They see my body. They see her. They relate to that. If it was a painted image, there's too much play of like fantasy. Is it real? Now you see these big boobs on this kind of, baby dyke. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, and I love that, and it's like the love and that embrace and vulnerability and desire without even touching. And that's what this Je T'aime is the series. And Raquel and I started doing this series, I think, probably about 5 years ago. And we first did it, our first one we did in our home in Connecticut, and then second in Paris. This third was in Detroit and partially in Connecticut. But it began as a journey of how we were loving each other, but our experiences in these different places, and how I just remember wanting to do it because how she looked at me. I wanted to capture that. I wanted the world to see how she looked at me, right? And how that made me feel. It's like, wow, and how do you put that? How do you express that that joy, and without showing the physical intimacy, right? Because in some of those, we're actually having sex. Oh. Sorry, baby. Oh, sorry. I'm telling too much. I'm sorry. I think I'm talking too much now. But we are. And
they're going to be rushing out to find that poor part.
But you never see it,
No.
right? And so to me, the challenge was, how do you film two people having sex without seeing it?
Yes.
And it's like you never show the sex. You show everything but that. And you still have the same energy, you still have the same love, you still have this desire, the touch, all of that, and of us looking. And so it started just thinking about the pillow, the head on the pillow, that space between two lovers. We all know that first love, that moment when you're just like, oh, I love him, I love her. It's like, it's that space, right? In your head, you're on the pillow, you're there, and you're staring. And it's like, ooh. And to me, it was like, I wanted to film that quiet space and capture it on film. So that's why we're always looking at each other, because I wanted the viewer to be in my position and hers at the same time.
How did you get so comfortable with?
My mother,
Okay.
truly, even with all her shit and her craziness and her love, she was a damn good mom. And she was also really generous with who she was and sharing herself. She told me, I have the privilege of learning so much about my mother as a person that is truly a gift. It's like the things that she told me that she's done and, and shared with me, and just her sexual relation. It was great. I loved it because it allowed me to accept who I am and to be free and open, unapologetically. And I love that about myself. I love that about my work. And I don't really care if people think it's personal. It's what it is. And I'll get tired of making it when I'm tired of making it.
You asked me what was overwhelming. The other thing that was overwhelming was the exquisite artistry of your work. And can you just talk a little bit about how you make this art? I mean, I
I don't know how I make it.
Well, give us something. I mean, does it take forever?
It takes forever. What I love about this show is that you see works where it's like I'm tripping over my feet because my shoes aren't tied. And then you see it evolve because I looked down and I said, let me tie my shoe. That's what I do.
When you see your work, I mean, sometimes when I reread some of my stuff, I said, ooh. When you
No, there's a lot of work in there I wish I can take off the wall.
Really?
Yeah, I do. Because I feel like sometimes, but then there's also work I'm glad that is here. And even though I wish there's this need to want to take it off the wall, because it's like, oh, I'm not at that place anymore. But I'm glad it informs the work. It allows other people to see how one can evolve, and like where they came from and where the work goes. And I think that's beautiful, even if it's like messy and crusty and like why would she do her feet that way? Or that's not proportionally correct, or and that's okay. Is that a toe or a thumb? So it's okay, and how I do it is I start with the photographs. I start and invite my muses to the tableaus. I photograph them. And from that point, I will look at some of the photographs and decide which ones I will make into collages. After I make a series of collages with different materials, photographic paper, I then scan those in and scale them up and sometimes manipulate the color and the composition. So I actually create another collage, which is the digital collage for the painting. And then I use that image, the digital collage, as the resource for the painting. And then print that up and decide what areas I want to be rhinestoned or oil or silkscreen or this or that. And then we try it, and then I change it all or not, or try it, and if it works, and you push it through. And then through the work, because I do a lot of collages, sometimes with the collage cutouts and mess layered on top of each other, something happens. Like the large collage you see as you enter, when I was invited to do something for that wall, I was kind of behind on giving them the image, and because I had something in mind for the show. What I had in mind was to try to create an image that excited the viewer upon entering the show. And I didn't know what that was. First I thought a figure, first I thought a landscape, then I thought, well, no, not a landscape, maybe an interior, and then it's like, no, not an interior. And so I was getting a little overwhelmed about what to make because I had this deadline. And I had started this collage of Raquel, and it was like all of these cutouts were on my table. And I just looked down, and I was like, oh, there it is. So that became the image for there. So it was, sometimes your art tells you the direction you need to go. Because you already made it, you were doing stuff, and I actually happened to look, and it's like, oh, that's, and so that's what that image is out there. I, tweaked the composition a little, but that's how it was. And it looked right, my mark making was there, the cutout, everything, the scale relationship that worked. And it was an interior and a landscape and all of this at once. So it was all of these things that I was desiring and wanting that, and I believe your work manifests, you put it out there, you speak about it, and it's like, here I am. I believe that the studio practice is probably the strongest thing an artist can have because it will tell you what you should be doing sometimes. How my work evolves is usually from other works. How I started making landscape is through the other work. The interiors, all of that evolves from the work itself, from the act of making. And looking in my studio and ideas of like, okay, maybe I can just like, what if I just remove all of this? And with the interiors, I thought, what if I remove the figure? The figure's still there. How do I represent a portrait without the person? And so that's how the interiors came about. And I was excited about those ideas. And I usually come back to my studio if I have an experience or see something in the world that really allowed me to think more. This new series of paintings called Resist came about from seeing the James Baldwin movie, I'm Not Your Negro, and I went back to my studio and I made these amazing paintings in relationship to that film. So this whole new series. So it's a lot of times it comes from films that you see or, something that you read, Going back to The Color Purple, I don't mean to go back there, but I just remember thinking about The Color Purple and all of its manifestations, from book to film to play, like how that it's so necessary, and it's all these iterations because it tells such a profound story. And me really wanting to celebrate that and express in my work how with these women, how they've shaped me. And so they became mentors in my work. And I think your mentors can be sort of these people you have no connection to. And so it's important for me to bring them back into my work. So I'm very excited about those paintings. And very thankful to you for introducing me to Alice Walker,
And we have to spend some more time together. You and Alice, yeah. And I'm not saying this because you're saying, but you and Alice have had the most impact on my deep self.
Thank you.
No, seriously. And
just the fact that you said that in the same sentence of me and Alice Walker, that's just amazing.
So we've ended. I decided to close up my folder and not ask you any more of the questions on here, and I'm glad I didn't, because this was more spontaneous, and I love talking to you.
I love talking to you too. Thank you. Thanks.